Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is what if Naruto is again attacked on his 10th birthday and saved by the Hokage's daughter Kiyomi Sarutobi Part 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. Enter the X-Men. October 10th. It was the night of the Kyuubi festival and the village of Konohagure was filled with the sounds of joy and laughter. Everywhere except one particular area of the village. If anyone were to investigate this area, they would see a mob of drunken villagers and a few ninja chasing a young boy with bright blonde hair, cerulean blue eyes, 3 whisker-like markings on each cheek, and wearing a bright orange, "I'm here come and kill me," jumpsuit crying out things like, "Demon" and "Monster." The reason this young boy was running was because he was 6-year-old Naruto Uzumaki, container for the 9-tailed demon fox and the village pariah. To many foolish villagers Naruto was viewed as the fox reborn, but this wasn't true. Naruto was just a scared little kid who was chased on a regular basis for a reason that no one would tell him about. A block away, 5 people were walking towards the Hokage Tower. If anyone were to see these 5, they would have to do a double take. They were all dressed plainly enough, but there were some that stood out as strange. One was wearing a black leather jacket, blue jeans, a black shirt, a cowboy hat and a set of dog tags. The upper part of his face was partially covered with the cowboy hat but a person could still see his rough, weather-beaten features. His cheeks were covered in a pair of heavy sideburns and his teeth were sharper than usual, all of it combining to give the man a feral appearance. His hair was a dark metallic blue, almost black, and his eyes were a dark brown. His deep snarling voice seemed to add to the man's bestial appearance. Another wore a similar jacket, a black body suit, and instead of a hat he had a crimson visor over his eyes. He was slightly taller than his companions and walked with the authority of a leader. His hair was deep brown and slightly curly, and his eyes were hidden by his visor. He spoke with the authority of a man used to being in command. The shortest one was covered from head to toe in a dark cloak, completely hiding his features from view. He spoke softly with a slight accent, though those in the village couldn't place where the accent came from. The next wore a long trench coat, with some kind of deep purple armor over his chest and legs, and a pair of black pants. He had reddish-brown hair that was kept long and uncombed and kept out of his eyes by a brown bandana, and his face was scruffy with a day's growth, giving him a roguish air. However, the man's most drawing feature was his eyes. The white areas were pitch black and the irises had a deep red color that seemed to almost glow in the dim light. His voice matched his roguish appearance and held a slight accent, though different from his cloaked companions. The last one of the group, however, was Kiyomi Sarutobi, known to her friends and fellow X-Men as Psylocke, the daughter of the 3rd Hokage, a fact well known around the village. She had inherited her mother's looks, with long deep purple-black hair and deep purple eyes. Her clothing was a deep blue cloak surrounding her, rather modest, black body suit. She spoke with an easy grace and a control that showed a clear understanding of her surroundings. "Remind me again why we're all here again, Slim," the man in the cowboy hat whispered to the man with the visor. Psylocke wanted to stop by home, and the professor didn't want her to come alone, and we weren't doing anything, Logan. The man replied, sounding a little annoyed. "Besides, between the 4 of us, we're best suited to handle ninja." "How do you figure on that, Scott?" asked the man hidden in the cloak. "Your teleporting can get us out of here in a hurry, Kurt. Remy here can be as crafty as any ninja. Logan can sense when something is wrong, and Scott has all the firepower we need, if we need it. Add that to my own ninja training and there isn't anyone in this village that can cause us any problems," Kiyomi said, glancing behind her. They continued walked until they heard something, the cries of a child. "You don't need enhanced hearing to know what that is," Kurt said, throwing off his coat to reveal his form. He showed a thin and lithe form covered in deep blue fur wearing a red and black bodysuit. His hands and feet had 3 long fingers, plus a thumb for the hands, his eyes were a bright yellow, and a tail sprouted from his back. "Come on!" he shouted. The group followed the sound, and when they saw what had caused it, they froze. Naruto had been cornered. The villagers and ninjas were tapping their weapons against their palms with sick grins on their faces. "Now is when you die, demon," said a pink-haired villager, raising a carving knife above her head. Suddenly, there was a puff of smoke, and the pink-haired woman found that her blade was being blocked by a man with what appeared to be 3 metal claws protruding from between his knuckles. While she was distracted, the man's other fist, this one with the claws sheathed, came forward and slammed the woman in the stomach, knocking her backward into the crowd. Behind him was what the villagers could only be described as a blue-furred demon. "It's okay, little one, you're safe now," the demon said to Naruto. While he was nervous, Naruto heard the kindness in his voice and reached out to take his hand. "You got the kid Nightcrawler?" the clawed man asked. "Yeah, Wolverine, I have him," Nightcrawler replied. "Then get him over here," said a new voice. They spun around to see 2 new men and a woman, one man wearing a visor, the other apparently shuffling a deck of cards in his hand. The woman, however, was what caught most of the villagers' attention. She was instantly recognized as the daughter of their Hokage, Kiyomi Sarutobi, who had been traveling abroad. In a puff of black smoke, the demon teleported himself from behind the mob to appear next to the woman. The boy wrapped protectively in his arms with the clawed man standing in front of them protectively. She bent down and began checking the child for injuries while asking, "Are you okay, little one? Did those people hurt you?" she asked in a sweet and caring voice filled with concern. The boy only shook his head, shocked that these people seemed to be trying to help him instead of hurting him as was the norm. One very nervous shinobi stepped forward and asked, Lady Sarutobi W, what are you doing here?" Psylocke instantly turned her attention away from the boy and a deep glare filled her features. "That's just what I was going to ask you bastards. What the hell is wrong with you people? Attacking a child like this, have you all lost your minds?" she finished in an enraged shriek. Many villagers looked intimidated by the woman's rage, but one idiot, the same one knocked out by Wolverine punch, stepped forward and shrieked back, "That is no child, it's a demon." "Now, Lady Sarutobi, I suggest you and your friends," she hissed the word while glaring daggers at Wolverine, who just returned the glare, "leave before you are hurt," she finished threateningly, with the rest of mob shouting their encouragement. The girl may have been their leader's daughter, but they weren't going to let her and her collection of freaks stand in their way. "How can you call an innocent child a demon, you heartless whore?" hissed Nightcrawler, memories of his own youth and the attacks he'd suffered due to his appearance adding to his growing anger. "Silence, you freak, you know nothing and should remain quiet while your betters are speaking," shrieked the pink-haired woman. The woman's arrogance was really getting on Psylocke's last nerve. With a twisted idea, she decided to learn exactly what was going on in the village. Over the past 12 years she'd been absent and silence the loud-mouthed bitch as well in one fell swoop. "Well then," she spoke with a sinister grin, "let's just find out what is going on then." Her hand instantly shot out and grabbed the pink-haired bitch by her oversized forehead. In an instant, Psylocke bright purple mental energy swirled around her hand and enveloped the woman's head. In an instant, all the woman's memories of the boy came into Psylocke's head. She saw the third's explanation of what the boy contained and his message about how the boy was to be seen as a hero, and the woman's, along with most of the remainder of the village, decision to ignore. She saw the attacks, beatings, and assassination attempts the woman had helped plan or attended, as well as her and the rest of the council's actions to make the boy's life miserable, his banning from the stores and overcharging of items. Psylocke's already angry mind flew into a dead rage. "You bitch!" she screamed while drawing her mind blade, and swish! Off came the woman's arm. The woman fell to the ground screaming while the rest of the mob stood still, stunned by their leader's daughter's sudden active, to them, unprovoked rage. The other X-Men looked at her curiously before Gambit asked, "Damn Sherry, what did you see in the lady's head to make you go executioner on her?" Psylocke looked at her fellow X-Men with a look of barely contained rage. "I'll show you," she stated coldly while raising her hand. Instantly 4 bolts of mental energy hit the other X-Men, downloading what Psylocke had just seen into their minds. The knowledge made the already angered X-Men furious. Nightcrawler and Gambit were the most affected by the images, since both had been treated so poorly because of how their powers affected their appearance. Both were positively ready to kill. Nightcrawler's eyes were glowing a deep baleful yellow, and Gambit started to pulse with the ruby energy as his cards began to glow. Cyclops was stunned for a moment before his own anger flared, and the usually calm leader lifted his hand to his visor to release a blast of optic doom onto the bastards. Logan, well, to say Logan was pissed would be the understatement of the century. His claws were both fully extended and a feral snarl was plastered across his face as he prepared to leap into the mob and start ripping it apart. Sensing the killing intent, several of the ninja in the mob threw weapons at the X-Men, but they were intercepted and destroyed by Gambit's charged playing cards and Cyclops' optic blasts. Before any of the X-Men could start their counter, a new voice broke in. "Enough!" shouted the voice. Instantly standing between the mob and the enraged X-Men was none other than Hiruzen Sarutobi, the third Hokage, surrounded by several squads of Anbu. As the crowd began to calm, believing their leader had come to save them from his maddened daughter and her group of freaks, their hopes were soon dashed as the Hokage stated, "Anbu, take these villagers to Ibiki for interrogation and punishment." Hearing a groan from the ground, he added, "Oh, and take Mrs. Haruno to the hospital before she bleeds to death," he added as an afterthought, "before taking her to Ibiki." He finished. As the mob cried out their shock and fear, the third turned to Psylocke and her comrades and said, "Hello, my dear, it's good to see you home again," stated the Hokage with a small smile. Psylocke's voice and look remained icy as she glared at the man before saying, "I wish I could say the same, Dad, but we have a lot to discuss. Like how you've let your village get so out of control that mobs are now attacking innocent children," she stated coldly while glaring at her father. Sarutobi knew that look and that voice from her mother. "I'm screwed," thought the Hokage as he led the X-Men and Naruto to his office. His daughter had refused to let the boy out of her sights. XXXXXXXXXXXXX. "I wish you could have come at a better time, Kiyomi," the aged Hokage said sadly. "Much has changed since you left. I'll say," Psylocke shrieked, causing Sarutobi to flinch. "When I left, you were stepping down as Hokage, giving the job to one of Jiraiya's students. Granted, you got an excuse to be back after I learned that the fourth died fighting the Kyuubi and sealing him inside Naruto, but you're the Hokage, damn it. Can't you do more to keep those psychotic, idiotic fools from hunting him down like he was some animal?" She panted after her rant, staring at her father with a look that would have put Bobby Drake, the infamous Iceman, to shame. Sarutobi continued to flinch at the words and the icy glare that filled his daughter's gaze. "Kiyomi, you must understand," he tried to reason with his irate daughter. "I've done whatever I could to help the boy these last 10 years, but, for the most part, the council has." "Screw the fucking council," shrieked Psylocke. "You're the Hokage, the leader, the head honcho, the boss. Those bastards can only override your authority if they have proof of negligence or corruption that they can present to the Lord of Fire, and I doubt they can convince him that protecting a child is treasonous behavior. The truth of the matter is, Dad, you've gotten weak-assed," she finished coldly. Sarutobi stood up at this. "Now see here, daughter. I have not." "You haven't," interrupted the purple-haired Kunoichi, X-Man. "Then what happened to Hiruzen Sarutobi, the professor, the god of shinobi? Where's the man that could send entire armies running with single scowl? 'Cause I know he isn't sitting in here letting a bunch of civilians and retired shinobi push him around." Sarutobi sat back down, a shocked look on his elderly features. "She's right. What have I let myself be reduced to? A figurehead, a clerk, filling endless amounts of useless paper. No more. It's time those bastards remember who wears the hat in this village," thought the elderly Hokage with a determined look plastered across his aged features. He stood once again. "You know, Kiyomi, you're right. I've gotten complacent in my old age, but that ends now. If those bastards think they can push the professor around any more, then they're in for a rude awakening, he said with a malicious smirk. Psylocke smiled and leaned forward to give her father a kiss on the cheek. That's the daddy I know and love, she said with pride as the two exited the room. XXXXXXXXXXXXX. Outside the room, Logan was standing with his back to the door giving a dark chuckle. She's really cutting into him, isn't he? Gambit asked with a smirk. He'd always tried to be chivalrous and took the phrase, "Hell hath no wrath like a woman scorn," very seriously. To him it meant never piss off a woman or else you were going to die a slow and painful death, if you were lucky enough to die, that is. Oh yeah, Logan chuckled before glancing back at the kid. I can't believe that after all the hell this place has put him through, that the runt can still laugh. Naruto was currently playing with Nightcrawler as the elf was bouncing off walls and hanging from various things with his tail, all while under the watchful eyes, or eye as the case may be, of Cyclops. Maybe laughing is the only thing that kept him sane all these years. Gambit said solemnly. During his time on the streets, whenever the shit would hit the fan, he would just laugh it off and try to keep going or figure out a way of whatever mess he got himself into. He actually reminds me a little of you, Logan. From what we understand, he's a quick healer and got a monster inside him. Only thing he's missing are the claws. Logan snorted and gave a small smile that was barely noticeable beneath his hat. Maybe, grunted the old soldier with a thoughtful look. The door opened to show the Hokage and a slightly chipper Psylocke. I would like to thank you all for protecting Naruto earlier, Sarutobi said. Wouldn't need to if you could do it yourself, old-timer. Logan growled. That's enough, Logan, Cyclops said, rising to his feet, although he does have a good point, Lord Hokage. And I think I speak for everyone here on my team when I say that there's not a chance in hell that we're going to leave Naruto here. At that, the blonde boy and old village leader snapped their heads to look at Cyclops. What are you suggesting? Sarutobi asked. Simple. We take the boy with us back to the X mansion and train him. Cyclops said. Will I ever come back to the village? Naruto asked, looking back and forth between the leader of the X-Men and the leader of Konoha. Only if you want to, kid, Logan growled out, but I'm not sure why you would want to though. I want to come back to prove to everyone that I'm not a monster and that they'll finally have to acknowledge me for me and not that demonic furball I've got locked up inside me. Naruto stated with a determined look in his eyes. Sarutobi's eyes widened when he heard Naruto mention the fox. You know about it, Naruto? Sarutobi asked, frightened. Come on, old man, I'm not as stupid I let those villagers believe me to be. How could an idiot do so many pranks without Anbu being able to catch me once? Naruto asked, getting chuckles from most of the X-Men. They'd seen some of the boys' pranks thanks to the memory transfer. Attacking me on the day of the Kyuubi's attack, calling me monster and demon, hell, I even heard some of them talking about a fox hunt. It's not that hard to figure it all out, old man. Everyone was staring at Naruto, surprised, before several of the X-Men started to chuckle. The young one reminds me of you, Remy, Kurt said with a smile. The thief only gave the elf a smirk in response. Part me and part Wolverine, that is a scary combination. Gambit said with a chuckle. Well then, it's decided. Naruto will come with us and train for a few years before we bring him back here to become a ninja, if that's what he still wants after all this time. Cyclops said. How's that sound to you, kid? Logan said. Want to hang around with a bunch of other freaks and weirdos and learn how to use whatever powers you've got? Naruto smiled and nodded vigorously. Well, since Naruto agrees, I won't argue, but I'm trusting you with the boy's safety and ninja training, Kiyomi, he said, looking at his daughter, who gave a stern nod. Have him back in 5 years for his final year at the academy. Do we have an agreement? Getting nods from the X-Men and Naruto, the old Cage continued. Good, now I just need one of you to sign some papers releasing the boy into your custody. He finished with a small smile. For once he was looking forward to doing that bit of paperwork. It would ensure Naruto's safety and growth over the next few years, and it would royally piss off those bastards in the council. All right, Cyclops said. Psylocke, you go ahead and help Naruto with any packing. Send Kurt a message when you're ready for pickup. I'll handle the paperwork. Logan, I want you and Gambit to go prep the Blackbird for launch. I want us out of here before any more of the villagers get any bright ideas about keeping the kid here, the leader of the X-Men ordered. Blackbird? Asked a curious Naruto. Are we flying there on a giant bird? The X-Men merely chuckled. XXXXXXXXXXX. The next 2 hours passed quickly for Naruto. He and Psylocke had left the Hokage's office and made their way to his apartment. The 10-year-old Naruto had to stop Psylocke from going on a murderous rampage after she'd seen the abysmal state of Naruto's apartment. After quickly grabbing the few personal items that Naruto wanted to bring with him, Psylocke had refused to take any of the horrendous, Target Practice Orange, jumpsuits with them, stating that they would buy him some new clothes as soon as they got back to the mansion. Naruto didn't mind. He liked the color orange, sure, but even he knew that kind of clothing was just another civilian attempt to get him killed. After finishing, they stepped outside and got onto the roof of the building. Psylocke sent Nightcrawler the mental signal to pick them up, and a few moments later, the blue-furred acrobat appeared in his usual flash of black smoke. Been waiting long? He asked with a slight smirk. Then the three were off, and a few moments later, after several of Nightcrawler's hops, the three came to a rest in a clearing a few miles outside of Konoha's gates. Naruto staggered a bit when they finally stopped. Sorry, Nightcrawler apologized. It's always a little shaky for the first-timers. You get used to it. Naruto just shrugged it off before his eyes went wide. In the clearing rested a vehicle that Naruto could only describe with a single breathed word. Sugoi. You can say that again, mon petit ami, stated Gambit with a cocky grin as he stepped out of the vehicle. This is MS-22 Blackbird. She's the top of her line in stealth flight technology. She can fly an inch over your head without you feeling the slightest breeze. Enough yapping already, now that you and the runt are here, we're ready to go, stated an impatient Wolverine. What's the rush, Logan? Asked Psylocke, a concerned look crossing her features. I can smell some yahoos coming our way, and I doubt they're coming to wish us a fond farewell, growled Wolverine. Well, you heard the man, stated Gambit, and we all know that Logan's nose always knows best, he finished with a chuckle. The remainder nodded and began boarding the Blackbird. As Naruto entered at the end right behind Psylocke, he looked out and with a firm look stated, I'll be back, and I'm gonna show everyone what I'm capable of then. The X-Men nodded as the hatch closed. Something about the kid told them he was going to be or do something grand. That was all they knew. With a slight hiss and a searing blast of air, the Blackbird took off into the skies, carrying with it a piece of Konoha's future, and perhaps its greatest legend yet to be born. Arrival at the Institute. We find our 10-year-old hero asleep on the Blackbird after several hours of flight. Gambit had just come to check up on the blonde in one of the passenger seats to find the youngster fast asleep. He quietly moves back up to the front where the rest of the 5 X-Men were gathered. The little one is fast asleep, he stated with a grin. You can't blame the youngling for being tired. After everything that has happened today, I'm surprised he didn't fall asleep right after takeoff, responded Kurt. The rest of the gathered mutants nodded their heads. The boy had a long night and needed to get some rest. RETA on the Institute is another 2 or 3 hours, so I say we let the runt rest, but we make sure to wake him up before we get there. I got a feeling the runt's gonna want to see his new home, growled out Logan. The others nodded their heads before Cyclops spoke up. How do you think the professor is going to react when we bring home our newest house guest? Knowing Chuck, stated Wolverine with a chuckle, he'll scan our brains to see what we saw, and take in the boy in a heartbeat. You're right, and the rest of the students and teachers will instantly take to him once they found out what he's been through, stated Psylocke. I just hope we can keep Jean and Storm under control when they find out, muttered Gambit, getting everyone's attention. You saw how Sai here went executioner when she found out what those bastardos did to Naruto, and Jean and Storm are even more protective of the little ones than she is. When those two find out, he trailed off, leaving the effect to his teammates' imaginations. Konoha will be lucky if it's not turned into a crater, finished a now frightened Kurt. After a few moments of silence, Psylocke stated, "On that happy note, I'm glad that we found him before Magneto did. I mean, if Magneto found him and saw what those people did to him, then every kunai, shuriken, and any other piece of metallic equipment in the village would turn on Konoha." "So the kid's a mutant like us?" asked Logan. "Yes, I felt his X gene becoming more active when I examined him after the ruckus. I think that healing factor of his is part of it. Guess he's even more like to you, Logan, than we thought," stated Psylocke with a playful grin, getting a grunt from said Wolverine. "His X gene is still mostly dormant, so he probably has more powers, though I can't tell what they could be, but I doubt they will fully awaken for another year or two. Given the kind of treatment Naruto was being given, if we'd left him in Konoha, I don't doubt that his powers would have awakened violently," Psylocke stated calmly. Everyone nodded at that. When a mutant's powers awaken, they tend to do so according to their surroundings. If the mutant is in danger during them, the awakening of their powers will flare up rather violently to protect them. Given Naruto's circumstances, in the village, the boy's awakening powers could have done some real damage. Well, we don't have to worry about that happening. At the mansion, the kid will be safe and sound, and we can make sure he gets all the teaching and help he deserves, stated Cyclops firmly. "I agree. I already made a deal with Dad. He'll send us scrolls and books for Naruto to help with his training, jutsu and techniques mostly. Good, cause something is telling me that kid is going to be a magnet for trouble when he grows up, and we're gonna make sure he's prepared," stated Logan solemnly. The others nodded. They'd gotten that feeling as well, and they'd all made the same vow, to protect and help the boy reach his full potential. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX Naruto awake. The blonde stirred slightly and looked up at her. We're almost home, Naruto, Psylocke said with a smile at the young boy. Come up front so you can take a look at your new home. The boy smiled as he climbed out of his seat and stretched. As he walked out and found the other four waiting for him, he looked outside the front and started at the building that stood below them. When Naruto had heard it called an institute, he'd figured it was a dreary school-like building. Instead, what he found was a mansion. It was a huge building that looked bigger than most of the clan compounds back in Konoha. It was sitting on a cliff overlooking the ocean, and it looked too beautiful for Naruto to describe. As the blackbird circled around the cliff, it entered an alcove hidden among the stones and emerged into the hangar. As the 5 X-Men and Naruto exited the blackbird, Naruto decided to ask a question. So are a bunch of people here like you? He asked Kurt. The blue elf smiled at the boy. Neen, little one, there are some but not many. Nightcrawler explained. You see, Naruto, mutants develop their abilities in multiple ways. Psylocke explained. There are those whose mutations are physical like Kurt's, and there are people like me and Wolverine who appear normal, others whose appearances change even slightly, like Remy's eyes, or they can't properly control their powers like Scott. Like my whisker marks? Asked the blonde. Exactly, mon petite Amy. Agreed Gambit while ruffling the boy's hair. So just like how everyone looks different, their powers are different too? Naruto asked. More or less, Runt, Logan said with a smirk. We should really take Naruto to see the professor. Scott said. You know he'll probably know everything by now. Remy said with a smirk. Still, he'll want to meet Naruto. Scott said. Does someone want to tell me what's going on here? Naruto asked. They're talking about our leader, the one who brought us all together and gave us a place to be safe. Logan said. His name is Professor Charles Xavier, but everyone here just calls him the Professor or Professor X. Naruto nodded in understanding. He knew that the professor must be a man of great intelligence and respect. The old man was also called the Professor. A few minutes later, the X-Men led Naruto to a set of doors. This is where you'll meet him, Naruto. Scott said. You guys aren't coming with me? Naruto asked. No, Naruto, you'll be going in on your own. Kiyomi said, kneeling down next to the boy. Don't worry, the professor will take care of you. She leaned forward and kissed the boy on the forehead before stepping back. Turning to the door, Naruto took a deep breath and walked forward, raising his hand to knock on the door. Come in, Naruto, said a voice on the other side of the door before Naruto even touched the door. The voice was deep and highly cultured, like a gentleman of high society. Naruto freaked for a second, but mustered up his courage and opened the door and walked in. Sitting behind the desk was a bald man wearing a suit. Nice to meet you, Naruto. My name is Charles Xavier. The man said. Then he rolled out from behind the desk and Naruto saw that he was in a wheelchair. Welcome to the Xavier Institute for the Gifted, or, as some of my students prefer to call it, the X Mansion. So, this place is a school? Naruto asked. Precisely, Naruto, the professor said as he rolled over to meet the young boy. You see, there are many people out there like the X-Men, they are called mutants. Because of their mutations, they are given special abilities. You mean like a Kekai Genkai or something? Naruto asked. In some ways, yes, the two are comparable. The professor chuckled. Take myself for example, I am a telepath. Before you ask, that means I can read people's minds and do other things. Now, Naruto, since you first walked into the school, I have been inside your mind and analyzing your memories, and I must say I'm impressed. You are certainly a strong-willed young man. What you've been through could have driven many grown men into madness, but you've not only remained sane, but retained a kind heart. Thank you, sir, Naruto said with a smile. However, just like in your village, if you do too much pranking here, you will get into trouble. You don't have to worry, sir. I saved the more serious pranks for those who were especially cruel to me, but I doubt I'll be able to give up my trickster ways so easily. Naruto said with a foxy grin. We will see about that, Mr. Uzumaki. The professor said, accepting Naruto's silent challenges. In the meantime, however, you will become a student here at the institute. That being said, I would like for you to take a tour of our school. Sounds great, agreed the grinning blonde. Excellent, Psylocke will accompany us as well to help with the introductions, agreed the professor. You rang Charles, joked the ex-woman. Yes, my dear, I was hoping you would mind helping me give Naruto a tour of his new home, stated the professor. It would be my pleasure, professor, stated the woman while smiling at Naruto, who returned the smile. She soon stood behind the professor and began to push the wheelchair with Naruto following right next to her. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX. Naruto was first shown the dormitory area of the academy. It took up most of the academy's second floor, with rooms designed for anywhere between 1 and 4 individuals. Professor X led Naruto to a certain room and stated, "Here we are, Mr. Uzumaki, and this will be your room for the duration of your stay at the institute. I hope you don't mind, but you will have a pair of roommates." I don't mind, professor. It will be nice to have some company, stated the young blonde with a soft grin. Good to hear it, and from what I can sense, both of them are inside, so why don't we make the introduction now, stated the old gentleman, with Naruto nodding his agreement. As Psylocke opened the door, Naruto took the moment to take in the room. It was fairly large, with 3 beds stretching across the length, a large closet, a TV, and a few other features littering the place. Naruto then noticed the 2 individuals who were already inside the room. Both were a bit older than Naruto, probably 14 or so. The first had dirty blonde hair worn short around his head, light blue eyes, and features that reminded the young blonde of Cyclops. He wore a pair of blue jeans and a red t-shirt. The other one looked a little older to Naruto, with deep brown hair and matching eyes. He wore a pair of dark blue pants and a light blue t-shirt. The 2 were currently just messing around, throwing a ball back and forth while talking to each other about something that Naruto didn't catch. When both of them noticed the door open, they turned to see who had come in. Noticing the professor and Psylocke, both stood up. When the older one noticed Naruto standing behind Psylocke's leg, he asked, "Hey professor, Kiyomi, who's the kid?" Professor X nodded at the boy and motioned for Naruto to step forward and stand beside him. The blonde did so hesitantly. After the years of abuse he'd suffered, Naruto was more than a little uneasy around strangers. The professor noted this and made a mental note to help the blonde with his trust issues before they developed into something worse. This is your new roommate, Mr. Drake. Go ahead, Naruto, don't be shy. He comes from Kiyomi's homeland and is in training to be a shinobi like her, stated the professor encouragingly. That's awesome, said the younger one. Hello, my name is Naruto Uzumaki, it's nice to meet you, stated Naruto nervously. Both boys looked at Naruto curiously before looking at the professor. The professor sent them a mental message stating that Naruto had been through a difficult life due to certain circumstances. Both nodded at this. It wasn't the first time a battered kid had come to the academy. Many mutants suffered some kind of abuse because of the early signs of their mutations. The older one decided to be friendly and show the kid they meant no harm and responded, "Hey Naruto, nice to meet you. My name is Bobby Drake, also known as the Incredible Iceman," he stated with a demonstration of his powers, conjuring a snowball into his hand. Same here, and I'm Alex Summers, but most around here call me Havoc, he stated with a demonstration of his own, blasting away Bobby's snowball with a burst of red energy from one finger. The blonde's eyes widened at the show and he whispered, "Sugoi." Those soon entered his mind and he asked Alex, "Are you related to a guy named Scott?" "Yeah, he's my big bro." "Why?" responded Alex. Naruto smiled at this. "He saved my tail yesterday and brought me here. He's a really great guy." Alex nodded his head at this. "Sounds just like my bro, he's one cool dude." Bobby nodded his head. Cyclops was one of the most respected and liked of the older students at the institute. He then asked, "Hey Naruto, what's your power?" he asked curiously. Before Naruto could respond, Psylocke butted in and stated, "Naruto's powers aren't fully emerged yet, but he does have a healing factor similar to Logan's." Both the boys nodded with grins on their faces. Logan's powers were always deemed cool by most of the students since it made him near invulnerable. Before the boys could ask any more questions, the professor spoke up again. "I'm sure Naruto can answer your questions later, but now we have a tour to continue and we mustn't sit around talking all day." Both boys nodded and said their goodbyes to their new roommate, getting a promise from the blonde to talk to them soon about being a ninja in training. After the three left to continue the tour, Naruto spoke up. "They seemed nice," stated the blonde nervously. Psylocke could feel the nervousness and fear radiating from the blonde and understood the reasons for it in a heartbeat. He's become so used to being hated for something he couldn't control, he's almost lost the ability to accept being treated with kindness by others. She thought sadly. She bent down and wrapped the boy in a tight embrace and whispered, "Naruto, I know you've been through hell because of what you contain, but I promise no one in the mansion will hate you for what you contain. We've all lived through that kind of hate in some form or another because of our powers, and through that bond we care for and protect each other. I promise you here and now on my Nindo that I will never let anyone hurt you like that again," she stated solemnly. Naruto was shocked by the conviction in her words, and for a moment couldn't believe her, but then he looked into the woman's eyes and saw the commitment locked deep within them. He returned the hug tightly while whispering a soft, "Thank you." Charles watched this brief moment with a smile on his face, knowing that Psylocke would keep her word and protect the child. He felt the growing bond between the two and he was happy to see the strong, almost paternal, affection that Psylocke was showing the child. Kiyomi had never been a feminine woman since he first met her. Her strict shinobi training she had put herself through had taken most of that away, but with the boy the woman showed a motherly aspect that seemed to pierce her usually cold and harsh exterior. These two will be good for each other, thought the professor. Naruto will help bring out Kiyomi's motherly instincts and femininity so she can feel more complete, and Kiyomi will help Naruto learn to trust and accept kindness. After a few moments the two ended their brief embrace and returned to the tour. All three of them were wearing soft smiles for their own reasons. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX med bay where Naruto saw a beautiful red-haired woman apparently patching up another student and sending them on their way. Jean, I would like you to meet Naruto, he is going to be a new student here. Professor X said. Hello there Naruto, she said with a smile that made Naruto blush a little bit. My name is Dr. Jean Grey. It's nice to meet you Dr. Grey. Naruto said hiding behind Kiyomi. Jean furrowed her brow before looking at the professor who relayed to Jean what had happened to Naruto. For a second her hair seemed to fly out behind her and her eyes turned into a flaming red. For a second Naruto thought she looked like an angel of vengeance and was scarred shitless. Jean, sensing his fear, calmed down and seemed to return to normal. I'm sorry for scaring you Naruto. Jean said kneeling down next to him. I just learned from the professor what happened to you and got angry about how you were treated. Jean said, reaching forward and stroking Naruto's hair. You're so cute, I can't wait till the day Scott and I have kids. You mean you and Scott are together? Naruto asked. Jean nodded with a smile on her face. Naruto was already starting to think of ways of spying and pranking the couple when he felt himself being lifted up and facing Jean's smiling face. Naruto, if you do anything to me and Scott, I'll make it so that if someone says a certain word, you'll run straight into the nearest girl's bathroom. Jean said in a scary sweet voice that made Naruto shiver. He quickly understood that if there was anyone in this place that he shouldn't mess with, it was her. Now run along Naruto, you've still got a lot of people to meet. She said giving him a small peck on the cheek. Naruto turned around and left with the professor and Kiyomi. She's nice, but she scares me a little bit. Naruto said. Kiyomi chuckled at the blonde and stated, Jean can have that effect on people, but she is similar to you in a lot of ways. How's that? Asked a curious blonde. Like you Naruto, Jean also possesses a separate entity within her body, stated Professor X. You mean she has a Biju in her too? Asked the blonde with a voice mixed with a number of emotions. Not exactly, though your two entities may be related in some way, but Jean holds a being of pure energy within her called the Phoenix. We'll need to ask both hers and your tenant if the two are related in any way, responded the professor with a thoughtful look. As the three continued their tour, they drew closer to a window. Naruto's eyes widened and he looked out at the garden that was being grown outside. I see our little Naruto just might have something of a green thumb, stated Psylocke with a soft chuckle. The professor chuckled as he rolled next to the young man. Would you like to meet the young woman who is responsible for creating this garden? He asked. Naruto nodded his head vigorously with a smile plastered on his face. Kiyomi and the professor smiled and led Naruto into the greenhouse where a dark-skinned woman with pure white hair was tending to some of the plants. Hey Storm, we got another gardener here. Kiyomi called, getting the woman's attention. She looked up to see Naruto and smiled warmly at him. Hello there young man, do you like my garden? Naruto nodded as he examined all the different kinds of plants, many of which he'd never seen before in his life. It's beautiful Miss Storm, Naruto said smiling at the woman. Storm is just my nickname around here Naruto. My real name is Aurora Munro. Aurora said. That's a pretty name, Naruto said, causing the woman to giggle. But why do they call you Storm? Aurora just smiled and waved her hand, calling up a small storm cloud that started to water the plants. Naruto went wide-eyed at the sight. That is awesome, he shouted. Thank you, she stated with a small grin. She then turned to the other two and asked, Professor, Kiyomi, who is this young man? Psylocke sent Storm the mental projection of what happened to Naruto. Instantly a small crackling of thunder was heard overhead. I see, she stated in a strained voice before turning her attention back to the still exploring Naruto and asked, Tell me Naruto, do you like gardening? Yeah, I love growing plants and stuff, but back home every time I tried to grow one it got destroyed, he stated sadly. Well, how about I give you a plot in my own garden that you can grow to your heart's content, and we can work together on the rest of it. She asked with a soft smile. Really? Asked the blonde excitedly. When she responded with a nod, Naruto started jumping around excitedly before hugging the woman and saying, "Thank you." The other two just stood and watched the happy interaction as the two talked about the different plants in the greenhouse and garden. Naruto seemed to know a lot about plants with practical uses ranging from medical to poisonous. Psylocke smiled at this. It was part of ninja training to look for a practical application to most hobbies. She smiled as she stepped forward and said, "It's time to continue the tour, Naruto. You and Storm can continue your gardening chat later on, but I'd like to finish the tour soon so you can meet your classmates." Naruto nodded at this and said goodbye to Aurora after getting a promise to meet later to start gardening. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX. The three continued their tour without another incident. After finishing the tour of the lower levels, Naruto couldn't wait to try out the danger room. They decided that it was time for Naruto to meet his classmates. Checking the clock, Charles stated, "I do believe that your class will be outside at this time doing their gym exercises with Mr. McCoy. Shall we go introduce you?" After getting a nod from the blonde, the three headed outside once again, heading into the large open yard at the back of the institute's grounds. As the three approached a large ball court, they found a large number of kids, ranging from Naruto's age to early teens, playing a game. Overseeing them was a large, Naruto could only describe as bestial, man. He was covered in a slightly shaggy coat of blue fur from his head to his toes with sharply pointed ears and sharp teeth and claws. After noticing the three approaching, the bestial man told the younger ones to continue while he bounded over to meet the three, and stated, "Greetings Charles, Kiyomi. What can I do for you and who is this young man you have with you?" He asked in a rich, cultured voice that didn't seem to fit his bestial shape. "Hello Hank, this is your new student Naruto," stated Kiyomi before she sent Hank Naruto's memories. Hank suppressed a growl at the memories before turning to Naruto and saying friendly, "Well then, it's a pleasure to meet you Naruto. I'm Dr. Hank McCoy, but my friends call me Beast for obvious reasons, and I'll be in charge of a fair bit of your education during your stay here at the academy. Naruto Uzumaki, and it's nice to meet you too," stated the blonde happily. The blonde didn't know why, but he felt safer around people like Kurt and Hank, maybe because they were probably treated like monsters because of their looks, just like he was because of the Kyuubi. A question suddenly popped into the blonde's mind and he asked, "You wouldn't happen to be related to Kurt, would you?" "Why would you ask that Naruto?" asked a slightly confused Beast. "Because you're both blue and furry," responded the blonde, getting laughs from all three of the adults around him. It wasn't the reason most were expecting. After Hank's laughter died down to a weak chuckle, he answered, "No Naruto, I'm not. Now how about we go introduce you to your fellow classmates?" Getting an approving nod from the blonde, the two walked over to the ball game and Beast blew on his whistle to get everyone's attention. After the group quieted down, Beast spoke up, "All right everyone, we have a new student who will be joining our class after today. This is Naruto Uzumaki. He's a special case that has just joined the institute, so I'd like you all to introduce yourselves to him and make him feel welcome. Who'd like to start?" The students nodded. Special cases usually meant mutants that had suffered some kind of abuse before they came to the institute. One girl stepped forward to introduce herself. She had brown hair that was tied back in a ponytail, soft brown eyes, and looked to be about a year older than Naruto. "I'll start," she stated in an eager voice. "My name is Catherine Pride, but don't call me that, I prefer Kitty, and my ex-name is Shadowcat. I can phase through physical objects." She finished with a demonstration by ghosting through a nearby set of bleachers. "What's an ex-name?" asked the curious blonde. "That's the name the students have given to the nickname that represents our powers," answered Beast. "Like my ex-name is Beast, Kiyomi's is Psylocke, and Kurt's is Nightcrawler." Naruto nodded. It made sense since the names represented what they could do, sort of a way to warn allies of their abilities without giving away too much info to the enemy. The next student to step forward was a tall, lanky kid with dirty blonde hair who looked to be about 12. My name's Sam Guthrie, my ex-name is Cannonball, and my power lets me smash through anything in my path. He demonstrated on the same bleachers Kitty used. As he ran forward, his body seemed to be covered in a mini cyclone as he smashed through it. Beast stated in annoyed voice, "Mr. Guthrie, please don't destroy the school's equipment for your demonstrations." Sam chuckled embarrassedly, rubbing the back of his head. Next to step forward was tanned young woman with Brazilian features, not that Naruto knew what that meant, who looked about 12 as well. My name is Amara Juliana Olivia Aquila. Naruto blinked at the length of her name. My ex-name is Magma, and my power lets me control and create molten lava, she stated while causing a small jet of magma to gush out of the ground before settling it back into the earth. Next was a perky young woman with dark hair and eyes covered in a pair of sunglasses who looked about 11. My name is Jubilation Lee, but my ex-name and preferred title is Jubilee, and my powers let me generate my little fireworks, she finished while releasing small blasts of multicolored energy that left scorch marks in the dirt where they hit. Next was a young girl about Naruto's age with bright red hair and a slightly feral appearance. My name Rani Sinclair, my ex-name is Wolfsbane, and my power lets me shape-shift into a wolf-like form. With a quick leap she changed in a wolf with dark red fur, then into a taller wolf-human hybrid, and then back to her human form. My power also helps heal me a lot quicker than normal, though I'm nowhere near as fast as Wolverine's. Next was another boy about Naruto's age with short brown hair. My name's Jamie Madrox, my ex-name is Multiple, and my powers let me split into multiple different bodies. He then split into 4 different bodies before rejoining into a single body. The power reminded Naruto of something the old man had called the Shadow Clone Jutsu. Next was a tall boy a year older than Naruto with dark hair and thick features. My name is Peter Rasputin, my ex-name is Colossus, and my power lets me turn my body into solid steel. He then changed into a shiny steel version of himself before reverting back to his normal body. Next was a tanned young girl about Naruto's age with long metallic blue hair. My name is Laura Kinnery, my ex-name is either Talon or X-23, and my powers are the same as my dad's, Wolverine, she stated while showing her adamantine claws. You're Wolverine's daughter? Naruto asked. Laura bit her lip and looked away before answering. Well, if you want to get technical, I'm his clone, she said. I was created to serve his original purpose, to be a living weapon. Naruto's eye twitched, sounding like she had had it no better than he had. He reached forward and put a hand on her shoulder. Well, at least you've got a family and friends now, Naruto said, smiling at her. Laura looked at him and smiled. Another boy stepped forward. He was about 12 years old and had bright yellow hair with a few orange spikes up front. My name is Ray Crisp, my ex-name's Berserker, and my power lets me control electricity. He then released a massive blast of electrical energy that burned through a good deal of the courtyard. The next boy to step forward had dark hair and looked to be about 11 years old. My name is Roberto da Costa, my ex-name is Sunspot, and my power lets me absorb solar energy and turn it into power. His body turned black and was covered in a bright orange aura as he lifted a nearby bench up one-handed before setting it down and reverting to his normal form. The last person to step forward was a gloomy young girl about 12 years old with brown hair with a pair of white bangs in the front. My name is Anna Marie, ex-name's Rogue, and I kind of prefer it to my real name, and my power lets me absorb life energy from others. Only problem is I can't control it, so I can't touch anybody, she stated in a depressed fashion. Naruto felt a little sorry for the girl and stepped forward to place a hand on her covered shoulder, only for him to slip as he approached and fell face forward into her, resulting for the two to share a quick lip lock for about 5 seconds as their faces touched. Both stayed like that for a shocked moment, foreheads still touching, until Naruto jumped back screaming, "Sorry," over and over. Rogue didn't even hear him. She was starting at Naruto while touching her lips before running a hand over the part of her head where his forehead touched hers. She suddenly stated. You touched me. She stated in odd voice. But how? If anyone else had touched me like that, they'd have been unconscious in a second, but you're just fine, not even slightly winded. She asked as her emotions started to show shock, fear, and a little bit of hope mixed in. Naruto scratched the back of his head in a confused manner. Well, my power isn't fully awakened, but part of it is a healing factor like Logan's, plus I've always had near unlimited stamina. That still doesn't explain it. Wolverine can't touch me cause his healing factor doesn't stop the drain, Rogue responded heatedly. That's correct, Rogue, but you must remember that all mutant abilities, even those that have the same effects, are unique, stated the professor as he approached the gaping crowd of students. Naruto's healing abilities simply work in a different way than Logan's that allows him to touch you without any negative effects. A most interesting effect. Rogue still sat on the ground stock still for a moment, before leaping forward to hug a still stunned Naruto. I can finally touch someone. She laughed, shouted happily. Naruto, while being strangled by the hug, could only gulp as he whispered, happy for you, but that won't be much use if you strangle me to death. Everyone laughed at this. Today made it quite clear, Naruto's 5 years at the academy will be an interesting time. Birth of the Trickster. 1 year later. Naruto sat up in his bed and stretched. So the chainsaw finally wakes up. Bobby said, smiling at Naruto. No kidding, bro, I'm glad we got those earplugs. Alex said, ducking under the pillow Naruto threw at him. Bobby, however, got a face full of pillow. You guys should start being nice to me. I'm meeting with that fur ball in my gut today and I'm sure I'll be able to awaken the rest of my powers. But until then, Bobby said, shooting an ice blast at Naruto that sent the blonde running for the shower. Jerks, Naruto muttered with a smile on his face. Those two giving you a hard time, Suga? Asked Rogue, walking forward and kissing Naruto on the cheek. After they hit it off in a rather comical way, Rouge and Naruto had grown closer and closer. Rogue had become quite affectionate to the boy, and most of the guys around school, Bobby in particular, had been jealous of the new kid, but after Rouge, and a few of what the students called Logan's girls, had set the story straight, they backed off but just played pranks on Naruto, which the boy was more than happy to pay back on his own with interest. The girls were a group of younger mutants that Logan had taken an almost fatherly position over. It's nothing, I can't deal with Marie. Naruto said, hugging the girl. Especially after I get that fox to unlock my powers. Just be careful, Naruto. Rogue warned. After I finally find someone I can touch, I don't want to risk losing you. Don't worry about me, Rogue. Naruto said, stroking her white streak of hair and twirling it around his finger like she liked. I'll have the professor, Jean, Mama Psylocke, and that Emma Frost lady watching my back. Rogue just held his hand and snuggled into it. I just don't want to lose you, Foxy. Rogue said. You won't, Rogue, I promise. Naruto said. And you know me, I never go back on my word. You'd better not, Suga. Rogue said with a smile. Well, as much as I'm sure you'd love to see it. Naruto said, reaching the bathroom with a wicked smile. I need to get a shower. He shut the door gently on Rogue's blushing face. After his shower, Naruto proceeded to get some breakfast. The kitchen was empty for the most part since most of the students in his class had left. The only students left were Rani and Logan's girls, X-23, Rogue, Kitty, and Jubilee. Good morning, ladies. Naruto said pleasantly. Hey Squirt, you nervous? Asked Jubilee. Nervous about meeting the giant demonic fox who was sealed inside me at birth and made those morons in my village want to destroy me. Said Naruto, munching on some cereal. Nope, not really. All of the girls giggled at the young man's nonchalant attitude at everything. Well, Naruto, said Kitty, walking up next to the blonde along with Laura, Rani, and Rogue walked up next to the blonde. The other girls and I were thinking about giving you a little good luck. Laura and Rogue both leaned down and kissed Naruto on the cheeks. Before he could recover, however, Rani and Kitty swooped down and did the same. After, the four girls stood up giggling slightly. Are you going to kiss me too? Naruto asked Jubilee. No, I just see you as more of a little brother, not to mention my partner in crime. She said with a cocky smirk. Damn, stated Naruto with a snap of fingers and a foxy smirk, and here I thought my foxy charms made me irresistible. 4 out of 5 is more than most boys can claim, Romeo, said Rani with a smirk before she got serious. Don't die or go crazy on us, at least not before you make the big choice. Count on it, said Naruto. I promised Rogan, now I'm promising you guys I'll be okay, and you know I never go back on my word. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX raised his hand to knock on the door. Come in, Naruto, the professor said. Naruto cursed under his breath. A full year at the institute and the professor could still do that. He'd worked so hard to develop those mental blocks so he couldn't be detected by telepaths for his pranks, but the old man could still sense him. Sighing, Naruto walked in and found the professor, Jean, Psylocke, and a woman around Jean's age with blonde hair wearing a white outfit. Are you ready? As ready as I'll ever be, professor, said Naruto, taking a seat. I would think after the good luck the girls gave you you'd be just about ready for anything, said Xavier with a small chuckle, making Naruto went beet red, especially after the teasing look Psylocke was giving him. His adoptive mother had always been one to tease him mercilessly, especially when it comes to his love life. Naruto was still happy about the fact that a little over half a year after he'd arrived, Kiyomi and Logan had gotten married. The couple's first official act was to adopt the blonde, and Naruto had never felt happier. Psylocke was the most caring person Naruto had the fortune of meeting, and she loved him like her own flesh and blood. As for Wolverine, there was always something about him and Logan that always seemed to work well together. Maybe it was their shared healing factor, or the fact that both had lived through hells most people would die in, or maybe it was just the primal instincts that sometimes seemed to get the better of both of them, but the two had always been close. Granted, he could still get on his new adopted dad's nerves with the pranks, but the grizzled old soldier couldn't stay angry at the energetic blonde without chuckling. Hell, the man always got a chuckle from the blonde's more creative pranks, as long as they weren't aimed at him, his bike, or his booze. Can we just talk to the fur ball? Asked Naruto, crossing his arms. Still chuckling, Jean and the others all sat in a small circle and started to concentrate and link their minds with Naruto. After taking a few deep calming breaths, Naruto closed his eyes, and when he opened them he found himself and the others in a sewer. Asked Naruto, looking around. My brain is a sewer. That's just great. Bobby is so going to love this. After all the abuse you suffered in your village, it's not that surprising your mindscape is so, said Xavier. Disturbing, said Emma Frost. I was going to say depressing, but I believe your term is more accurate, Emma, responded Xavier. Professor, said Naruto, how are you standing up? We are in your mind, Naruto, so whatever physical problems I have in the real world don't exist in here if I don't want them to, explained the professor. Naruto just shrugged. So, where do we go from here? Asked Kiyomi. Something is pulling me this way, said Jean as she started to lead the group down the tunnel. Just as the group of psychics nearly reached the end of the tunnel, Xavier held up his hand. The beast is here, he said. It hasn't noticed us yet. Emma and I will go first. Psylocke, you and Jean stay here and watch out for Naruto. Slowly, he and Emma walked out of the shadows and approached the cage at the end of the hall. Hello, Professor Charles Xavier, said a great voice as a pair of giant red eyes and a fanged smile appeared on the other side of the bars. Tell me, where is my vessel is hiding? I will not let you speak to Naruto just yet. Xavier said. Stay back for now, Naruto. Xavier ordered telepathically. First, I have a few questions for you. Then give me a moment, said the fox as it was surrounded by fire. When the flames died down, a man who one would probably consider an older Naruto wearing a red coat with 9 fox tails, fox ears, and red eyes. This is a bit easier to speak to you with in this form. So it would appear. Xavier said. Now, how did you know who I was? I know just about everything Naruto knows and then some, said the fox. I know all about you and your school professor, and I have to say I'm impressed by everything you do, taking those outcast by society for things they could not control. Thank you, the professor said. Naruto, you can come out now, but I want you to stay close to Kiyomi and Jin. Nodding to the two women beside him, Naruto walked forward, a look of fearless determination plastered on his face. What do you think of the look, Kit? Asked the fox. I think it looks a bit better on me, said Naruto. The fox chuckled. Actually, I based it off the man who sealed me inside you, explained the fox. Although now that you mention it, he just trailed off and shrugged. Why did you attack my village? Naruto asked. The fox sighed, figuring that this was coming. Believe me, kid, it wasn't by choice. It explained. I was attacked by a group of people in black cloaks with red clouds. Most of them buzzed around me like the annoying flies that you humans are to me, and one of them, a man in an orange spiral mask with a Sharingan eye, put me under a genjutsu and forced me to attack Konoha. So they're the ones we can really blame for screwing our lives over, said Naruto. Slowly, a wicked smile worked its way over his face. How does a little payback sound? The fox raised its eyebrow, as did everyone else. What are you thinking, kid? Asked Emma Frost. These guys attacked my home, said Naruto. Even if most of those idiots wanted me dead, there are still a handful of people there who are worth protecting. These bastards wanted to hurt those people. Which means to me we need to take them out before they hurt any more innocent people. A clapping was heard, getting everyone's attention. All eyes turned to see Kyuubi leaning against the cage bars. Not bad, kid, it said. Well, if you plan on taking these bastards down, then I'll help you out. Your X gene is still mostly dormant, but I can give it a little boost. Only hiccup is the mutation may be influenced by me a bit. Influence how? Psylocke asked. He will be able to call up Foxfire, a special flame that can only be put out by the user's will and is capable of creating illusions. He will also be able to transform into a smaller version of myself, and the final power will be similar to the Uchiha's Sharingan. It'll let you see how a person uses a power or technique and will let you copy it. Only instead of affecting jutsus, this gift will affect other mutants' abilities and maybe some Kekai Genkai. Oh, and it will probably ramp up that healing ability of yours to match your old man's, explained the nine-tailed demon. So I'm looking at a tricky flame, a fox version of Wolfsbane, and a mutation copycat, said Naruto deep in thought. Sounds like fun. I think with those I could be a real trickster. The fox smirked and looked around before his eyes landed Jean, and they went wide. You hold the phoenix inside of you, it said. Do you know it? Jean asked. You could say that, said the fox. You could also say that she and I were a little crazy back in the day. Okay, I think that's a little more information than we need to know about. Naruto said. This coming from a gaki with 4 girlfriends. The fox smirked at the blonde before returning his attention back to Jean. So my little canary, you mind coming out and singing a song for me? A moment later a burst of golden fire surrounded Jean, and in a moment a second Jean stood next to her. Only the newer one had golden red feathers for hair and glowing crimson eyes. Long time, no see big red, stated the phoenix with a grin before continuing. Seems like I'm not the only one lacking a physical body these days. Ha ha, very funny hot chick, responded the fox sarcastically. If you two don't mind the interruption, stated a slightly annoyed Jean, could one of you explain just how you know each other? I believe the best term that humans have to describe our relationship would be buddies, answered the phoenix with a smirk, getting a round of blushes from all mutants involved. We were friends most of the time, that just helped each other scratch and itch or two when we were both ready and willing, confirmed the fox. Which was quite often if I remember correctly, finished the phoenix with a perverted grin. Yup, agreed the fox. Well, not to cut this embarrassing conversation short, stated a crimson Naruto, but is there anything else I need to know about your awakening my powers, Kyuubi? Just one more thing, Kit, responded the fox. It's pretty likely that after your powers manifest, if you mimic any psychic abilities, which is pretty likely since you're spending the next few years around some of the most powerful psychics in the world, you and I will probably develop a mental link. Got it, stated the blonde as the surrounding began to fade around them. A few moments later, Naruto and the others awoke in the same position as they started back in the material world. So Naruto, asked Emma, have your powers activated? Naruto closed his eyes and concentrated for a moment. After a second he raised his hand and a small orb of blue-white flames emerged from his open palm. Naruto opened his eyes and stared at the orb of flame, and with a moment's concentration the flame bended, danced, and altered its shape to Naruto's whim. With another thought and motion the flame transformed into a bunch of butterflies that flew around the room, only to extinguish with a final thought from the blonde. That answer your question, Miss Frost? Smirked the blonde before he turned to the others. If you will all excuse me, I've got an egotistic snowball to go melt and an oversized laser pointer to discharge, he stated with a sinister smirk as he went off laughing maniacally as thoughts of revenge against his roommates filled his mind. Every adult in the room simultaneously sweat dropped. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX room. Since the blonde's powers had awakened, he'd taken the last few weeks to get complete control of them. He'd mostly mastered how to control both the fox fire and transformations, with a little help from Wolfsbane for the transformation parts. His copying abilities, however, were still a little beyond his control. He'd already copied Scott's optic blasts, Psylocke's telepathy and mind blade, Nightcrawler's teleportation and increased agility and reflexes, Logan's enhanced senses, Gambit's kinetic charging abilities, and to a lesser extent Jean's telekinesis and Storm's weather control, though both were greatly reduced with him only having a fraction of Jean's power and only able to manipulate the wind fully while the rest was only good for parlor tricks. Naruto didn't understand why he'd only copied their powers, but Kyuubi had explained to him that it was based on his close relationship with them combined with the maturity of his powers. Each of the X-Men he'd copied his powers from had a close relationship with him and their abilities were fully developed, unlike the girls or the rest of his friends whose powers were still developing. Naruto had been satisfied with that explanation and now he was retrieving training from each of the X-Men to control their own particular ability plus a few other useful skills. All right Naruto, I'm going to teach you how to control your aim with your new powers. Cyclops explained, turning to a target and pressing a button on the side of his visor and firing a blast, hitting a perfect bullseye. Wow, nice shot, Naruto commented. It's a pretty impressive power, even if the principle is pretty simplistic. I should be able to enhance it with my chakra. The fox said in Naruto's mind. I'll just make a small adjustment so that we can use it from our hands too, like his brother. All right, what do I need to do? Naruto asked. Ever since the meeting, he and the fox had gotten along pretty well. The fox had stated that he wanted a strong contained, as befitted him as the king of demons, so he started to do what he could to aid and enhance Naruto's abilities and training. Just point your hand or look at your target, concentrate chakra to the point of release and will it to fire. I'll do the rest, explained the fox. Nodding, Naruto raised his hand and concentrated. A blast of red chakra fired his hand, and an extremely large blast with enough recoil to knock Naruto on his ass and destroyed the area to the right of the target. Looks like you've got plenty of power in your blasts, but you need to work on your aim. Try it again with less force until you get your aim under control, then we can move on to larger blasts. Scott instructed. Naruto growled and stood up, raising his hand again. This time he concentrated on a less powerful blast, and when it fired, the recoil didn't blow him back, but his aim was still off. Okay, I still can't hit the broad side of a barn with my hand, but maybe my aim could be a bit better with my eyes. Looking at the target again, Naruto focused on firing the fox's chakra through his eyes. The energy shot through his eyes and hit the target dead center, but Naruto dropped to his knees, holding his eyes in pain. Naruto! Shouted Cyclops, dropping to the young man's side. After taking a few deep breaths and after he cried blood for a second, his eyes healed and Naruto got shakily to his feet. Apparently firing the fox's chakra from my eyes damages them. Naruto groaned. Probably not going to want to do that much. For the rest of the day, Naruto practiced with his hand blast. After about 5 hours of practice, Naruto was able to hit it with little to no trouble on a normal-sized blast. Not bad, Naruto, not bad at all. Scott said. Keep on practicing for an hour a day or so, and in a year or two you'll be a sniper with those things. Just keep in mind not to use your optic version unless absolutely necessary. We don't know how much strain your healing ability can handle just yet, and I'm sure you'll define. Eye blasts are a weapon of last resort, got it? Naruto said, nodding. Hey Scott, called Logan as he and Psylocke walked into the danger room. If you're done with the runt, the missus and I want to work the kid to death, stated the feral man with a wicked grin. Scott left with a grin, leaving Naruto alone with an evilly grinning Wolverine and Psylocke. You're going to kill me because I'm dating over half the girls plus Rani at the same time, aren't you? Asked Naruto, looking worriedly at his adoptive father. Oh yeah, kid, said Wolverine, cracking his knuckles. With a sigh, Naruto cracked his neck and dropped into a fighting stance that both Logan and Kiyomi had taught him. Grinning, Wolverine popped his adamantium bone claws and Psylocke manifested her psychic katanas. I am so dead, muttered the blonde. Lunging forward with his claws, Wolverine prepared to skewer Naruto and would have if he hadn't jumped out of the way to dodge the attack and shifting into what he called his feral form. After experimenting with his mutant powers, he had found that his shape-shifting ability came with 5 forms. His standard human form, which granted him no abilities with no tails, what he called his feral form, which was human-like but with fangs, claws, enhanced senses, 3 tails, and stuff like that. His half-beast form, which gave him furry arms and legs, even bigger boosts to his senses, speed and strength boosts, and 3 more tails. Then there was his full beast form that pretty much just turned himself into a 9-tailed Kyuubi the size of a 6-foot human. Lastly was his fox form, or as the girls called it, his chibi form, which was a normal-sized fox with the same golden red fur as the rest and a single tail. Leaping away from his adoptive father's claws, Naruto landed on all fours, growling like an animal. Psylocke charged forward next, psychic katanas in hand as she slashed at Naruto, who used his enhanced agility to dodge her slashes. After a backflip, Wolverine attacked again. Changing into his half-beast mode, Naruto caught his father's arms and struggled, seeing Psylocke charging towards him as well. I'm open to suggestions here. Naruto practically screamed to his tenant. Remember how you just need to think about blasting someone with Cyclops' power? Replied the fox. Just think and focus chakra to where you want to blast from and it'll happen. Got it, said Naruto, opening his mouth and firing off the fox's chakra from his mouth and blowing Wolverine back and then firing off a hand blast at Psylocke. Not a bad combo, Naruto. Psylocke said. Yeah, it was alright, runt, growled Wolverine. But this is just getting started. You're right, Naruto agreed, shifting back into his human form. And I'm glad I got to see you guys in action, because I just figured out how to combine your powers. Clenching his fists, causing claws of chakra that looked like Wolverine's to form on the back of one of his hands, while a katana similar to his mother's, only glowing blue instead of purple, appeared in his other. Not bad, runt, grunted Wolverine with a bit of fatherly pride. Now let's get back to business. Gladly, Naruto replied, charging forward and locking claws and blade with his father. Sensing his mom coming up behind him, Naruto focused his fox fire at her, conjuring up a 9-tailed fox to lunge at her and force her back. Their sparring went on for nearly 3 hours until Kiyomi called it quits, unable to keep up with her son and husband and their near-limitless stamina reserves. God, how she loved her husband's stamina when it came to other more enjoyable physical activities. 7 a.m. the next morning. It was a peaceful morning in the Xavier Institute for the Gifted. Naruto had gotten to bed a little after midnight after over 6 hours of continuous sparring with his father and was now enjoying some well-deserved sleep. That is, until splash. Naruto's newly enhanced reflexes and senses saved him from a very cold wake-up call. Damn, cursed Bobby, how do you keep doing that? He asked the annoying blonde. Ever since the blonde's powers had awakened fully, it had become nearly impossible to pull a decent prank on him, and added to that, the blonde's own pranks had grown to include his powers in many devious ways, earning him the X-name Trickster from a nearly unanimous vote from everyone in the Institute for the various tricks he created using powers. Needless to say, the prank war had turned in the blonde's favor. Alex had already surrendered and signed a ceasefire treaty, but Bobby was just too stubborn for his own good. Dad's enhanced senses and Uncle Kurt's enhanced reflexes, answered the blonde with his usual foxy smirk. When Bobby had been told about Naruto's ability to copy other mutants' abilities, the older boy had been royally freaked by the thought that the blonde could turn his own powers against him. Luckily, for him at least, the blonde couldn't control which powers he copied, so his ice abilities were safe for now. Stupid power copying little, Bobby mumbled under his breath in annoyance. He couldn't finish his insult before the blonde cut a nearby string and he was lifted up by his feet and now hanging wrapped up in a combination wires, rope and sheets. Damn it! Shouted the enraged Iceman. My ex-name isn't Trickster just for my powers, Frosty, stated the smirking blonde. He'd also inherited his father's habit of giving people annoying nicknames. He was quite pleased with the ex-name his family had given him. It really felt right on the blonde's shoulders. Bobby merely sighed in defeat and raised the white flag for this morning's battle. Naruto accepted the surrender and let his friend, rival, brother figure down. As Bobby stood back up, he asked, "So what's on your schedule today since we don't have classes?" "Dates with the girls all day?" he asked with a bit of envy showing quite obviously in his voice. "Afraid not. As much as I'd like to be spending the day with my lovely ladies, I've got training with Gambit all morning and Nightcrawler after that. Then Mom is giving me more ninja training. Damn, I don't know whether to envy or pity you for all the training you get," stated Bobby. "I gotta train hard. Remember, in a few years I'll be heading back to a place that mostly wants me dead, for a job that could get me killed," responded the blonde. "I still don't understand why you're so dead set on going back to that hellhole," stated an annoyed Iceman. Naruto had told most of his friends about his life in the village and they were all pretty anti-Konoha after the story got out. "Same reason we X-Men fight to protect a world that mostly wants to see our entire species wiped off the face of the earth instead of joining Magneto on Genosha," the blonde answered calmly. Bobby only nodded his head. His little bro was a true X-Man at heart, always looking out for the greater good. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX greeted the Cajun mutant as Naruto entered the danger room. Are you ready to begin an exciting day of training with your Uncle Gambit? To be honest, Cajun, responded Naruto honestly, I'd rather be spending the day with my lovely lady friends. This response caused the red-eyed mutant to grin at the boy he viewed as either a nephew or ever a kid brother at times. You're turning into a real chip off of my envoudent block. Don't let mom catch you boasting about that or she'll skin you alive with her katana, responded the blonde with a smirk, getting a shudder from the older mutant. It was true. Psylocke blamed Gambit for turning her son into a womanizer, and had repeatedly threatened to remove what the Cajun, and any other man, held most precious for that fact. Deciding that if he was stuck training for the day he might as well find out what Gambit was going to teach him over his training course. Hey Gambit, what are you and Kurt going to be teaching me? Dad's teaching me how to fight hand to hand or with my claws plus how to track people. Cyclops is teaching me how to better handle my destructive powers, not to mention strategy and leadership skills, and Mom is training me in my ninjutsu and kenjutsu skill plus the other ninja basics. Gambit snapped out of his funk and answered the blonde, I'm not sure what Kurt is going to be teaching you, you'll have to ask him this afternoon, but I intend to teach you the finer arts of thrown weapons, stealth, thievery, and how to wield a staff. Not to mention instructing you in the finer points of our newly shared gift. Granted, we won't be getting into the serious training until later, but you can think of today as an introductory course. N'ease pa. Got it, so where do we start? The next 4 hours of Naruto's training with the Cajun mutant went by rather quickly. It started with an hour of training in Gambit's explosive abilities, learning how to focusing the ruby energy into an object and then setting the energy to collapse and explode after a set time period or on contact with physical objects. After that, another hour quickly passed with Naruto training with various throwing weapons ranging from shuriken and kunai to specially designed cards that, when infused with chakra, became as stiff and sharp as a razor blade. The next hour was devoted to practicing with the staff. Today's lesson was only an introduction, so Gambit only taught him the basic stances for his fighting style. After that, the final hour was devoted to teaching him the thieves' trade. Today's lesson for that area of his schooling was introduction into the various picks, wires, prods, and other tools that were the thief's best friends. All in all, the training period was quite productive. He could infuse the destructive energy into a small ping-pong ball without much difficulty, but setting the trigger was much more difficult. Gambit had told him that until he could perfectly control the detonation of a small object, they wouldn't move on to larger objects. For throwing weapons, Naruto had already had some basic training from his mom in that field, but Remy's lessons were still quite useful for improving his accuracy and control. Bojutsu was a field that Naruto found very interesting since he knew his now officially adopted grandfather was a master in that field. He wondered if he could convince the old man to give him lessons when he returned to Konoha, but for now he devoured his uncle's lessons with great fervor. Finally, the skills of a thief seemed useful to the blonde as ninjas needed to get into areas they weren't supposed to be in, well that, and he knew it would drastically increase his pranking ability. The two made a quick break for lunch after the training was complete, and Naruto returned to the danger room for his training with Kurt at 2 o'clock. Unsurprisingly, the blue-furred mutant arrived right on the dot with an explosion of black smoke. Hey Kurt, so what are you going to be teaching me? Asked the blonde curiously. Well, mine nephew, responded the elf to his adopted nephew. I will be teaching you how to use your teleportation powers and natural agility to the fullest in our training sessions. I also intend to teach you the art of fencing to help balance your mother's kenjutsu training. Like Gambit's training and Scott's yesterday, this will only be an introductory class. The real training will start soon enough. Naruto nodded his head. He'd seen his mother and uncle spar with their own unique blades before, and he was always impressed with the sheer speed and agility that Nightcrawler's fencing style used. Another 4 hours passed quickly for the blonde. The first 2 hours were focused solely on Naruto learning to use and control his new teleportation ability. The key, as Kurt had taught him, was visualization of the target area. After 2 hours of constant effort and practice, Naruto had the basics down so he could teleport to anywhere within 30 feet of him as long as he could see it. It wasn't much, but it was a good start, as Kurt had proudly told him. The next hour was devoted to his fencing training, mostly like Gambit's, focusing on the basic stances. Finally, the last hour was where Naruto shined. He had always been naturally agile and had used it to great effect in avoiding hate mobs in the village, and now, combined with Nightcrawler's mutant agility, he was more like a monkey than a person in the trapeze-like setting Kurt had prepared for this training session. After the training was done, Naruto left his uncle to meet his mother on the backfields to begin his training. Unlike most of his teachers, Psylocke preferred training her son outside the danger room. As Naruto approached the wooded area of the grounds, his mother greeted him with a kind smile. Good afternoon, Sochi. Did your training with Gambit and Kurt go well? It was fine, Mom, but I'd rather have been on dates with the girls today, he stated with a grin. I really am going to have to behead Remy for turning you into a hopeless womanizer like him, Psylocke said with an annoyed sigh. You're just lucky that you fall under the CRA thanks to your father, and the girls agreed to share. And I count myself blessed for both facts on a daily basis, responded the blonde. It hadn't taken much for the two to realize who the blonde's biological father was, and with a little threatening from a very pissed Kiyomi, Sarutobi spilled the beans. He'd also informed the blonde as the sole surviving heir of the Namikaze clan and the only son of Minato Namikaze, he would be placed under the CRA and forced to take on multiple spouses to repopulate his clan. Needless to say, the blonde was a little shocked, but he soon got over it. When he'd broken the news to the girls, most had been less than thrilled, but after a girl huddle they'd agreed they would share the blonde among themselves and any others the blonde brought in as long as they met their approval. Naruto had agreed in a heartbeat. Well, actually, he had dropped to his knees, clapped his hands together and started thanking Kami with tears in his eyes. He couldn't wait to see the old man's face when he found out he already had 4 beautiful and powerful girls on his side. Moving on, stated Psylocke, I've got 2 big announcements for you. 1. I am going to be letting you sign the Sarutobi monkey contract soon and making you the newest contract holder since Dad passed it on to me. 2nd, we're going to start your training in elemental jutsu today, but before do that I need to test your affinities. How do we do that, Mom? Asked a curious blonde. He was quite excited about getting to sign his family's summoning contract, but he knew that could wait. Simply take this paper, and focus your chakra into it. The effect it has on the paper will tell us what your elements are, she answered, handing him a rectangular sheet of paper. Naruto nodded and did as instructed as he channeled some chakra into the paper. Instantly the paper split in half straight down the middle, with one half crumbling into powder and the other crumpling into a tight ball at one end. Psylocke whistled. A triple affinity, that's pretty rare for someone your age. Wind, lightning, and earth, that's a pretty solid combination. Lightning is mostly offensive while earth has a lot of strong defensive techniques and wind is pretty much balanced in between. Now let's start the training, stated a now sadistically grinning Psylocke. Naruto only gulped. This is going to be a long evening, he thought to the fox. Couldn't agree more, Kit, couldn't agree more. Departure from the institute. 4 years later. Time passed quickly in the X-Mansion for the young shinobi in training known to the world Naruto Uzumaki and to his friends and fellow X-Men as Trickster. Physically, the boy had grown up quite nicely from the short and malnourished child that the senior X-Men had brought back with them. He stood fairly tall at about 5 feet 9 inches with a lean muscular build. His hair still glowed bright gold and remained spiky, but instead of the near-bed head look it used to sport, the spikes were now deftly kept facing backward with only a few on the sides and the front facing in different directions. His eyes still glowed with a deep cerulean blue, but now instead of remaining in a state of near-constant gleam they could now become as cold and icy as a glacier when his mood shifted. His mutant powers had developed quickly, and while his ability to copy the abilities of others had settled down to being nearly inactive, he still had access to the powers he'd already gained plus his other mutant abilities. His training under the senior X-Men advanced far and quickly, and he now had a wide variety of skills at his disposal. From Cyclops, the boy's accuracy with his Fox blasts had become nearly pinpoint at mid-range and serviceable at long range. He could even control the amount of energy he put into each blast, allowing him to turn it into a stunning hammer blow or a devastating cannon blast. His training in both strategy and leadership abilities were also progressing quite smoothly. While the boy was no genius, he was quite clever, and that made a dangerous tactician, not to mention a truly remarkable leader. Gambit's training had also been paying off. His skill with his staff was now second only to his sensei, and he had even received a scroll on the Sarutobi style from his adopted grandfather when he had told the old man about his study in the art of Bojutsu. His control over his explosive powers was also nearly mastered. He could infuse anything the size of a bull to a 10 feet x 10 section of wall with enough explosive energy to either simply demolish it or create a massive boom corresponding to the size of the object. His aim had improved to near perfection with not only kunai and shuriken but with the special cards Gambit had given him as a birthday gift. They were custom made with the suits altered to show the spades as katanas, the diamonds as kunai, the clubs as staffs, and the hearts as shuriken, with the face cards revealing the jacks as Naruto sporting his foxy grin, the queens as his mother Kiyomi, and the kings as his father Logan, with the Kyuubi grinning demonically on the aces. They were specially designed so that with the barest amount of chakra running through them they'd turn into razor-sharp blades. His training in the field of thievery and stealth had been completed with a graduation trip around Europe with his teacher. After the month-long journey, Naruto had returned sporting a tattoo on each of his shoulders, leading his mother to attempt to castrate and then behead his uncle. His right shoulder now sported a grinning Kyuubi no Kitsune holding a royal flush in his 9 tails, and his left now held a golden gorilla sporting a dice in each paw revealing a pair of snake eyes. Another discovery of their training had been that the boy had a natural talent for gambling that his uncle always encouraged, again leading to his mother making numerous attempts on his uncle's life and manhood. Kurt's training had grown to be one of Naruto's favorites. His teleportation abilities were more limited than his uncle's, only allowing him to teleport to locations within his sight radius. His agility far overshadowed that limitation. Before gaining Nightcrawler's enhanced agility, Naruto had already been an extremely agile kid, relying on his superior speed, agility and endurance to escape the hate mobs that often pursued him in the Leaf Village. Now the boy was more monkey-like in his movements than some of his summons, springing from all sides and barely remaining still for a second in a fight. With a little chakra control training from his mother he'd learned to stick and move on walls just like Nightcrawler, and Kurt had made major efforts in combining the 3 abilities into a highly unpredictable fighting style. As for his sword training, the art of fencing was not wasted on the blonde and he was soon capable of holding his own with either 1 or 2 blades in hand. Combined with his other abilities, his so-called demon fencing style made him a truly unpredictable foe. His dad had also ensured that his own training was nothing less than murderous. Logan had promised to teach his son how to handle straight hand-to-hand combat, and the man's preferred method of teaching was sparring. Sparring translated to mean beating his son into a near coma until the boy learned the moves and showed that he could counter them. While the training was brutal, and Naruto had come to appreciate his healing factor to a whole new level, but Naruto would never argue with its effectiveness. He now had a basic understanding of several fighting styles and was more than capable of handling a fight with opponents twice his size and strength. Naruto training with his chakra claws was similar and equally effective, and now he could fight as fiercely and savagely as many wild beasts. As for tracking, his dad's enhanced senses combined with decades or even centuries of experience being used to teach him made the boy an effective tracker. His mother also ensured his training was far from simple. She had taught him several ninjutsu for each of his elemental affinities. She had also included training with his new summons, and the boy now had an extremely strong relationship with the monkeys and apes in the Sarutobi summoning contract. Her kenjutsu training also helped the boy balance out Kurt's fencing training to make the boy a very versatile swordsman. Her earlier training had shown the boy had extremely large chakra stores, but little control. Kiyomi had made it a goal to get the boy to at least an acceptable level of control. With the help of the leaf and Senbon balancing exercises, along with tree and wall walking, the boy now had at least an efficient amount of control. While the boy had learned the substitution and transformation techniques rather easily, he still couldn't do the simple clone techniques. Kiyomi had determined that this was due to the fact that with the boy's insane reserves he'd need at least cage-level control to be able to create as few as 10 normal clones. She had remedied this problem easily enough by teach the boy the shadow clone technique. The boy could use that technique easily enough, and had become an expert at using it in combination with his other skills. The rest of the instituted had aided the boy in his training as well. Jean had helped the boy master his limited telekinesis and also taught him some basic first aid just in case. His telekinesis didn't have a lot of power, but it could manipulate several kunai or shuriken at once for some dangerous attacks. The professor had helped him gain control of his telepathy, allowing him to form a sort of mental communication link with those nearby. Storm had helped him master his limited weather abilities, giving him the ability to create bursts of powerful wind, small showers of rain, and even call down a lightning bolt or two. Beast's training had been mostly academic, teaching the blonde the importance of knowledge and gifting the former knucklehead with a new interest in science and literature. All in all, his years at the Xavier Institute for the Gifted had been extremely enjoyable for the blonde. Most of his classmates and many of the upperclassmen at the institute viewed the blonde as a friend, and he had 4 lovely ladies that cared for him on a whole other level. All in all, as his final semester came, the blonde knew he would miss this place, the first place he'd ever truly felt at home. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX was his last day at the institute and he was missing the place already. Last day huh bro? Alex asked while sitting up in his bed to look at his roommate. Yeah, and I'm actually going to miss you and Frosty. Naruto said. We're going to miss you too man. Bobby said sitting up. Got any plans for your last day? Try and spend as much time with my girls as possible. Naruto said sitting up and changing. He wore blue jeans and a basic black t-shirt with a red X over his right. Walking into out of his room he made his way to the kitchen where he found the girls sitting at the table. Morning ladies, Naruto said walking around and kissing each of them on the cheek. Hey Naruto, Rogue said hugging him. I wish you didn't have to go back to that hellhole tomorrow. I know Marie, Naruto said hugging her back. If I could I would just stay here and take care of you girls. And, like, what makes you think we need taking care of? Kitty asked giving him a mock glare. Well I don't kitty cat, but bear in mind, when I leave I'm leaving you all in the hands of Bobby Drake. Naruto said. The girls all looked at each other before they burst out laughing. Well Naruto, it's your last day, what do you want to do? Laura asked. Spend as much time with the 4 most beautiful girls I know. Naruto said. Naruto spent the entire day going on dates with each of his girls. He and Rouge spent the first part of the day in a movie theater sitting close together cuddling while watching the newest flicks. Next he and Kitty converted the danger room into a private dance club and spent hours dancing close together. He and Rani spent their daytime on a run through the woods nearby, shifting from the human to animal forms throughout the time and occasionally playing tag. Lastly was Laura's date and they spent the better part of it in a hardcore training session. While most wouldn't call that a date, for the daughter clone of the Wolverine it was the only way to have a real good time. The date ended when she pinned him to the ground and whispered softly to him, "Don't you dare die on me," before kissing the blonde with as much passion as humanly possible. The day ended with a moonlit picnic shared by all 5. Naruto let out a hefty sigh as he returned to his room after the picnic to get some sleep and prepare for the next morning, a morning a part of the blonde hoped would never come. XXXXX. Naruto walked into the hangar where everyone of his friends and teachers were waiting for him. Taking a deep breath, Naruto started to walk into the room. He received nods and thumbs up from his fellow classmates, and had to jump over some ice that Bobby had placed in front of him. His girls all came up to him and Naruto created 3 shadow clones and gave each of the girls a kiss, none caring if they were kissing the real thing. Next were his teachers who were all beaming with pride. We've all got a few gifts to give you before you leave Naruto. Cyclops said, handing him a pair of ruby red sunglasses. These were the first glasses I ever wore to contain my powers. I want you to have them. Oh wow Scott, Naruto said stunned, taking the shades and sliding them onto his face. Jean stepped forward from beside her husband and presented the blonde with a belt pouch. This is a special medical bag I prepped for you, she said with a small smile. I know that, just like your dad, you don't get hurt easy, but it's always better to be prepared and you never know if someone you care about might need help. Thanks Auntie Jean, he said with a small smile as he placed the pouch onto his belt and hugged his aunt. For you mon petite Amy I have this. Gambit said, holding up a long tan coat like this own but had flames along the bottom of it and around the cuffs and a dark red X surrounded by a dull yellow circle in the middle of the back. In the coat you'll find a retractable staff your mom and I made. Just channel a little chakra through it to make it extend. Along with a deck of cards that are like mine so they won't be destroyed if you charge them with our power. I've also got a few sets of dice in there that are specially altered to be similar to the cards I gave you. Whatever number you roll will be the number of explosions you get. Both the cards and the dice have special seals that will let you call them back to their respective sheaths after they're used, and I also included some instructions on how to make more if you need them. Sweet, Naruto said slowly, a wicked grin spreading across his face as he put on the jacket. Kurt walked up next. For you, my friend, I have these. He said, holding you two-sheathed sword that had the handles and bell guards of a saber. When Naruto unsheathed one of the blades, it resembled a katana. These swords are as sharp and strong as a katana but handle just like a saber, so they should fit you perfectly. Thanks, Uncle Kurt, you're the best. Naruto said, smiling at the old circus acrobat while he placed the two blades across his back over the back of his new trench coat, forming a second X over the original. Storm stepped forward and presented two things to her fellow gardener. One was a small bag full of different containers of seeds and the other was a small set of spikes. These are for you, Naruto. The seeds are for some of your favorite plants in our garden, and the spikes are a security measure to make sure no one tries to destroy you next attempt in Konoha. Anyone who tries to get in without your approval will be in for a nasty shock, she finished with a wicked smile. Thanks, Auntie Aurora. He grinned as he hugged the dark-skinned storm mistress. Next to step forward was Beast. The blue-furred academic presented the blonde with, surprise, a book. This is a first edition copy of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. I know it's your favorite novel, stated the Beast man. Thanks, Hank, said the smiling blonde. Naruto had always felt an affinity for the green-skinned monster of the novel. Hated for something he wasn't in control of and never given a chance to prove himself was a story a little too close to the blonde's own for him not to empathize with the creature. His parents were the last to present their gifts. Here, Runt, I want you to hang onto this, Logan said, holding out an old, weather-worn, cowboy hat. Cool, Dad, Naruto said, and then he reached down into the hat and pulled up a set of dog tags, making his eye go wide. Dad, are these? It took me a while, but I managed to track down all my old dog tags from my days in the service, from American Civil, to World War II when I worked with Steve, to Korea. Wow, Dad, I don't know what to say, Naruto said, sliding the tags around his neck and placing the hat on his head. His mom stepped forward with a leather-bound book in her hands. Here, I managed to put together a little scrapbook, Kiyomi said. Naruto took the book and flipped through it, seeing pictures of missions to help mutants and just simple times like lying out on a beach with his girls. Mom, wow, thanks, he said, closing the book, and was happy he had the glasses on to hide his tears. His mother saw them, however, and whipped them away. Just remember that we love you, Naruto. You are a part of this family and you always will be, she said, hugging him tight. No matter what those idiots in Konoha may say or do, you are better than them and the only thing that kept them from being destroyed by the fox, Naruto Uzumaki, the pariah from Konoha, is gone. You're Naruto Sarutobi, my son, and the X-Man trickster. Thanks, Mom, Naruto whispered, hugging her tight. You're my son too, Naruto, Logan said, holding his son's shoulder. Which means that you've got a reputation to live up to. So if you ever let those idiots in that village try to push you around, show them what happens when you mess with a wild beast like us. If I find out about you letting any of those idiots push you around, I'm gonna come down there and beat your head into ground. Naruto laughed and smiled up at his dad. You got it, Pops, Naruto said. Now then, Naruto, the professor said, rolling up next to the family, there is one last gift for you. Raising an eyebrow, Naruto followed Professor Xavier to a corner of the hangar where there was what looked like a smaller version of the blackbird. Naruto, this is the raven, twice as fast as the Black Bird, only able to hold a single passenger and packing enough firepower to take on a small squadron of fighter jets. Naruto's jaw was dropped and he was practically drooling. "It's beautiful, Professor," Naruto said, staring at the small aircraft. "And it's all mine." "Yes, it is, and it also has the coordinates of your stop before Konoha in it," Xavier said. "Come again?" Naruto asked. "Naruto, do you remember what I told you and the others of Magneto and Genosha?" Xavier asked. Getting a nod from the blonde, he continued, "In order to keep what peace there is between his brotherhood and we X-Men, we have to have all graduating students travel to Genosha for a short period before they graduate." "How long?" asked the blonde, as he now realized why the professor had needed him to leave a bit sooner than the blonde thought he needed to in order to reach Konoha before his final year at the academy started. 3 months, answered the professor. Naruto nodded. "I understand, Professor. Gotta do what we gotta do in order to keep the peace. That's the job of an X-Man. Besides, I've always wanted to visit this so-called mutants' paradise, to see if it's really all that it's cracked up to be." The professor nodded in agreement before he spoke to the blonde in a voice filled with caution. "Be careful, trickster. Magnus will no doubt sense your power, and he'll definitely try to recruit you into the Brotherhood or his apostles. I am concerned that he may find some way to use your past history with Konoha against you." Naruto nodded. "Don't worry, Professor. I've come to grips with my past, and even if I don't like the villagers, I have nothing against normal people in general. He won't turn me into a hate-filled pawn, and any psychics he tries to use on me will have to face my fuzzy little friend first." He finished with a devious smirk. "And just whom are you calling fuzzy or little kit?" asked the annoyed fox demon in his head. "Sorry, Q, but think of it this way, pretty soon you may get to snack on some annoying psychics," responded the blonde, earning a dark and slightly maniacal chuckle from said fox demon. The professor noticed his charge's distraction, but put it away as him merely speaking with his mental companion. Kyuubi and Naruto had developed an odd relationship since their first meeting. The two annoyed each other to no end, but both understood that they were stuck together until they both met their respective dooms, so both made at least partial attempts to get along. It couldn't be called a friendship, more like a mutual understanding and good-termed partnership. "Well, with that, all I can say is good luck, my student, and know that the X-Men will always be there for you," stated the professor as he extended his hand to the blonde. "Thanks, Professor X. I really appreciate everything you've done for me," answered the blonde as he took the professor's hand in a strong shake. "You are entirely welcome, my boy, and don't think this will be the last you see of us. Everyone intends to make occasional stops at Konoha to check in on you, and I doubt your lady friends will stay away long," stated the professor with a slight chuck before a dark thought ran through his mind, "and heaven help any of those fools in Konoha if they are ever successful in harming you. I personally know that if that happens, they'll be facing the wrath of a near army of enraged mutant powerhouses. I doubt even I could stop all my students if that happened, even if I wanted to." As Naruto entered the Raven, he gave his friends and family a final wave before strapping himself in. As he flipped the ignition switches, he silently thanked Scott for the flying lessons. Next stop, Genosha. "I have a feeling this is going to be a surprising little expedition," thought the blonde as the engines exploded to life and he was off. As Naruto was rocketing through the air, he couldn't help but whoop with joy as he flew through the air. The smile on his face and the G-forces keeping him pushed back into his seat, he already loved his new toy. Of all the things he'd learned at the academy, the freedom of flight had been his favorite. "Enjoying yourself, Kit?" asked QB. He wasn't as fond of flight as his jail was. "Can you blame me, Q?" responded Naruto. After he finished his fun, Naruto began his flight to the island nation of Genosha. "So what should we do when the psychics start trying to mess with your head?" QB asked. "Remember the faces of whoever pops into my head," Naruto thought. "Warn them the first time to stay out, and the second time they pop in, I don't know, eat them or something." Several hours later, Naruto entered Genosha airspace and the radio crackled to lift. Unidentified aircraft, you have entered Genoshan airspace. State your business, turn your vessel around, or risk annihilation. This is Naruto Sarutobi aka Trickster of the X-Men. Naruto replied, I am here on the grounds of the truce between the X-Men and the Magneto to spend 3 months here in Genosha before returning to my home village of Konoha. After a few moments of silence, the voice returned. Identity and aircraft ID confirmed. Please fly around the area and enter the hangar on the east side of the island. Understood, Naruto said and started to fly around to the hangar. After landing, Naruto jumped out of the Raven and looked around. There were many mutants working in the hangar, some looked human, others were clearly mutants based on their appearance. Naruto Sarutobi, said a voice. Naruto turned to see a young man in a black and silver uniform with a clear helmet. He had dark hair and looked to be in his late teens. Who wants to know? Naruto asked. My name is Avalanche, I'm here to act as your tour guide for the island. He said. Avalanche huh? Naruto said. Kitty told me that if there was anyone here I needed to go to if I needed help, it was you. Kitty said that huh? Avalanche said, trying to sound tough, but his smile started to poke out. Yeah, so lead on Rocky boy. Naruto said. Avalanche growled. You're not related to Wolverine by any chance? Asked the annoyed Terramancer. He's my adopted dad, answered the blonde with a foxy grin. Avalanche grunted as he led Naruto out of the hangar and towards the center of the city. As he walked, Naruto was noticing he was getting a few points and whispers. It's the jacket, Avalanche said, noticing the blonde's curious expression. Huh? Naruto asked. The pointing and whispering, it's because of the jacket. He said. Oh, yeah, I suppose the X-Men aren't that popular huh? Naruto asked. Not really, Avalanche said with a shrug. Some of the civilians here graduated from the X Academy. They just decided to stay here than deal with the humans. Most of the Civis and the Apostles plus some of the Brotherhood respect the X-Men enough since Lord Magneto shows them respect, but there are more than a few who think of the X-Men as traitors to our species. I'd be careful just in case. I see. Guess that means my stay here won't be boring at least, answered the blonde with a slight smirk. Maybe I'll be glad I came here after all. And I am grateful that you have come here as well, said a voice above Naruto and Avalanche. They looked up to see a man in a maroon set of armor floating down towards them with a helmet covering his head. Lord Magneto, Avalanche said, bowing before the man. Naruto followed suit in a slightly shorter bow out of politeness. So you are Naruto Uzumaki, or would you prefer to be called Trickster? Magneto asked. The name is Naruto Sarutobi, sir. I've decided to take on my mom's name, and I prefer my real name for people I don't know well. Naruto said. Naruto Sarutobi then, Magneto agreed. I assume you know who I am. Eric Magnus, also known as Magneto, an old friend and former colleague of Professor Charles Xavier. Naruto said, believes that mutants are the superior species and should control the world, which is what caused the split between yourself and the professor. Mutant abilities include a complete and total control over magnetism and, to a lesser extent, over metal in general. A Class S level mutant, and the current ruler of the island kingdom of Genosha. Impressive, Magneto said. Know yourself, know your enemy, and you will always hold the key to victory. An old ninja saying my mom taught me, answered the blonde. A wise statement indeed, agreed the older man. Naruto Sarutobi, ex-name Trickster. An orphan of the village of Konoha, located on the Hidden Continent, and adopted son of Kiyomi Sarutobi, aka Psylocke, and Logan, aka Wolverine. Mutant abilities include an ability to create unusual flames, shape-shifting between different Vulpine states, an increased healing factor, and a slight ability to copy the mutant powers of those who you share a close bond. One of the fiercest of the new X-Men in a fight, but a humanitarian at heart with a soft spot for lost or damaged souls. You were ranked an upper B-level mutant if I'm not mistaken, with a strong chance of becoming a S class in the future. Naruto gave a slightly impressed whistle. You do your homework. stated the blonde with a slightly impressed nod as he adjusted his cowboy hat. Magnus nodded at the compliment. I do what I can. A ruler must know all the factors that affect his kingdom, and for Genosha the X-Men are one of the most important factors. Important or dangerous? Responded the blonde. A bit of both, I believe. Charles's students and I have had a number of disagreements in the past, but I do believe that if they can look beyond our past difference and see what mutant kind could accomplish if properly united, they would be welcome allies. You respect their abilities and would rather that they see it your way and work for you rather than fight you, clarified the blonde. In so many words, correct, answered the Lord of Magnetism honestly. Now I'd like to personally welcome you to the mutant homeland Genosha. I hope your stay here will be to your liking. Perhaps when it is over you will prefer to stay rather than return to such an unwelcome place. The way Magneto stressed the word unwelcome made Naruto pretty sure he knew about the blonde's past relationship with Konoha. I doubt it. I made a promise to someone I care about in Konoha that I'd return, and I never break my word, answered the blonde. An admirable trait, stated Magnus with a small nod of respect. He then turned to Avalanche and stated calmly, see to it that Mr. Sarutobi is well at home in his temporary dwellings, and then show him around the island. Getting a salute from the younger mutant, Magneto turned to leave before stating, I hope we will have the opportunity to speak again in the future, Mr. Sarutobi. Same here, Magneto, grunted the blonde. As the Lord of Genosha left, Avalanche let out a low whistle. Not many people can talk to Lord Magneto like that. You're either the gutsiest X-Man out there or the craziest. I prefer to think of it as a combination of the two, answered the blonde, getting a short laugh from the older boy. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX. Naruto was shown to his temporary home, a suite within the metal palace of Magnus. Naruto, whether being boarded in the Lord of Genosha's own manor was either a sign of trust or distrust. Trust for placing him so close to a powerful figure, where he could attempt to assassinate him easily, or distrust so that Magneto could keep a close eye on the young X-Man. Naruto finally concluded it was a combination of both. Magneto wanted to keep him under a close eye but trusted that no student of Charles Xavier would attempt to assassinate him. After placing his bags in the room to unpack later, not to mention check the surveillance tags he'd placed inside in case someone tried to search or steal from him without permission, Naruto followed Avalanche for a quick tour of the island. Naruto had to admit, Genosha was indeed an impressive place. The streets were filled with mutants ranging from people who could pass as normal humans at any point to people Naruto could hardly identify as being human, all of them using their powers freely and openly without any concern. Naruto watched as a group of young children, each no more than 8, played a game of tag using their abilities during the entire game. The young boy currently tagged it turned into a giant snake and slithered after one of his playmates, who suddenly started to glow before disappearing and reappearing a few feet to the right of where she had just stood. It was truly a remarkable sight, and reminded Naruto of the teamwork building exercises back at the mansion. Naruto smiled at the memory before a thought crossed his mind. Hey! He called to Avalanche, who was leading him and talking about a few of the best spots to grab a bite in the city. What? Asked the teenage mutant. Are there any norms here? I just figured at least a few of those kids had to have normal human parents, and I wanted to know if they lived here as well. Avalanche nodded his head. There are a few flat scans around, but they're in a big minority, mostly parents and sibs for the younger mutants, and the occasional spouse that didn't leave after finding out that they married a mutant. They're treated decent enough since they stood by their loved ones even when they were mutants. Most admire that in a flat scan even if they don't really fit in. Most of the sibs and some of the parents leave when the kids are old enough, can't take being on the receiving end of the outsider treatment, I guess. Naruto growled slightly at the term flat scan. It was a mutant insult directed at non-mutant humans. The professor had explained that the insult was derived from a research project a few years ago that showed that mutants had slightly elevated brain activity on CAT scans. Though it was impossible to prove whether or not a person was a mutant or simply having unusually high brain activity, but it still impacted mutant society, giving rise to the insult of flat scans for norms. Despite the fact that the guy was at least halfway decent, he was still one of Magneto's followers, meaning a hatred for norms was pretty likely. After the tour ended, he returned to his temporary home at the Metallic Manor. As Naruto entered the building, he bumped into another person preparing to leave. As both fell to the ground on their rears, Naruto quickly scans the person he just bumped into. She was a young woman, about 16 give or take, with short-cut black hair and deep brown eyes. She was dressed completely in a dark scarlet red, from the jeans and heels she wore along her lower limb, to the corset and large overcoat covering her top. Naruto couldn't help but notice that the girl was giving off an aura of barely suppressed rage and anger. She was definitely not your average teen mutant. "Pardon me," stated the blonde as he stood up from the encounter. "The name is Naruto Sarutobi," he said as he offered a hand to help her up. The woman quickly knocked Naruto's hand away from her, stood up on her own, and sent a bone-chilling glare at the blonde before stalking away. While most men would have been scared shitless by the glare and aura that surrounded the girl, Naruto was not most men. Naruto quickly decided that unpacking could wait and decided to follow the young lady. Something just screamed to him that he should, and the blonde never doubted his instincts, especially when it came to people.